Very interesting time we're in right now. We are on the precipice of a giant change of power.
If you had the crystal ball, what do you think in the first 100 days that's going to be directly related to what we do?
Project labor agreements are literally the $35 million question out there right now. A lazy view would be like, oh, Republicans not normally associated with labor, they're going to rescind it. Well, they didn't rescind the Obama-era executive orders.
I think a lot of people are concerned. The Infrastructure Act is directly tied to what we do.
Congress has the power of the purse. Once they specify that this is what you're spending money on, they've given up very little reprogramming authority to the executive branch.
There's so much consolidation going on at the M&A level right now. There aren't that many mid-level companies. Do you feel like that the Small Business Administration will start tackling this valley of death that you're seeing out there?
There are discussions of, for lack of a better term, middle business administration.
It's like a new agency they're going to form.
Don't tell it to Doge, though.
The Biden administration, one of their center party lines was climate change. Can you speak a little bit about that?
What I say about America is we always do the right thing after exhausting all other options. A lot of these trends are going to continue, maybe under a different name. Resiliency is still important. Look at what's happening in California right now with these wildfires. These are not stimulative events when you have huge loss of property.
What is your advice to business owners? They may be concerned, optimistic.
What I would tell people is get involved. Congress works for you.
This is The Build-Up, a podcast by Procon Consulting. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about a major change that's happening at the highest level of government, the inauguration of the 47th president, Donald Trump. With this change in leadership, we have a host of questions that we want to know, the impact that it's going to have in our industry. So we have with us Tom Williams, who has a lot of experience on the Hill, to discuss with us some of his thoughts about the incoming administration and its policies and its impact in our industry. So, Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Q. Thanks for having me on today.
So I just thought that maybe we can just get started to give us a little bit about your background and what you do, and then we'll dive right into your big picture assessment about the first 100 days and all the different things that you see in your crystal ball.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. And thanks again for having me on. Yeah, so it's kind of my background. Spent the last 7 years here in D.C., on the Hill, in the Pentagon, at the Army Corp of Engineers, and the Office of Secretary of Defense, Office of Legislative Affairs. And then before that, West Point graduate, was an infantry officer in the Army, retired after 20 years.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thanks for the support. But yeah, so a Army Congressional Fellowship brought me to D.C., and then, through that fellowship, which is a great opportunity, was in a member's office for a year, and then we had a utilization tour in the Pentagon doing legislative affairs for the Army. And then I was fortunate enough to just stay in D.C., stayed engaged, finished up my time as a legislative director for the Army Corp of Engineers. Then did a stint with multi-client lobbying at a larger firm, and now started my own firm, helping clients navigate the opaque world of both Capitol Hill and the Pentagon.
I just really am excited to have you on the show because there's absolutely a big buzz going on. Regardless of where you side on the political spectrum, there is a big change that's happening. And what I hope to talk with you today is from the industry standpoint. You know our industry pretty well. And so I just thought that maybe you can just dive in and just give us some broad perspective on the first 100 days.
Very interesting time we're in right now. We're 100 days. Right now, as it stands, we are on the precipice of a giant change of power. We just sat a new Congress at the beginning of the month. So you have a little bit of change there as the Senate flipped. But the House remains the same, Republican-controlled by the thinnest of majorities, which we've seen, just how problematic that can be, not only electing a speaker, but giving that speaker the opportunity to rule and pass legislation and kind of influence a broad coalition. And then everyone, AEC firms, as well as every other industry out there, is on the edge of their seat wondering what is going to happen. What is the first 100 days? The first 100 days is usually the critical time where a new administration likes to come in and really put their impact on. Things they can do right away is the appointments, which we see, but also the executive orders and stuff that will really affect a lot of industries, AEC firms being chief among that, is the executive orders that are coming down. What Biden executive orders will Trump rescind? Which new executive orders are going to be on the plate? And so that's going to affect a lot of industries, a lot of regulations. And then after that is kind of a big deep breath as everyone digests what happened in those 100 days.
Now, I just did a CEO survey that just came out, the results actually this morning. And just right off the top, the general sentiment from the business world in the AEC industry seems to be generally leaning towards optimistic. In your sort of running with the people that you are speaking with in the AEC industry, what is the sentiment that you're seeing?
There's a lot of reason for optimism, really in any administration, changeover, but especially now, because I think we'll see some regulations get rolled back, which will help business go forward. We still have seen historic spending. We've unfortunately seen historic inflation that comes alongside with it. But for AEC specifically, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, a lot of that money is 5-year money through different acquisition in appropriations authorities that will continue to be spent by the new administration. Some of that open and competitive, some of that direct award, and so we'll see a lot of those projects continue to get funded, and then there'll probably be some more projects on top of that. As much as different factions are fiscal hawks and wanting to tamp down on spending, there's still a backlog of infrastructure, both in military construction and civilian infrastructure, federal government spending.
A segue into that, you mentioned it, the bipartisan infrastructure law that was put in place, touted as a once-in-a-generation, $1.2 trillion that was going to help rebuild this country's infrastructure, stimulate economic growth, to put new opportunities and labor workforce into the economy. I think a lot of people are concerned, is the new administration, everyone's talking about the DOGE and all the government shrinking, but yet there's a lot of needs. And the Infrastructure Act is directly tied to what we do as a company. And so I'd love to see just expand a little bit more on what you think the administration's priorities will look like over the next 100 days, as well as over the next 4 years.
Yeah, certainly a lot of interesting topics there. With DOGE coming out, everyone is trying to figure out, hey, what does this actually mean? It's a very ambitious goal to get something done by the summer of 2026. Everyone's kind of wondering, like, how are you going to do this without Congress? Right? You got to get Congress on board. So now DOGE caucus has stood up a DOGE subcommittee on the oversight committee will come up, and so there may be a fruitful field for some of these ideas. Now, even in the federal government, I don't think you can cut, the kind of numbers that they want to balance the budget, and certainly not to get rid of the federal deficit anytime soon, just through these efficiencies. But it's almost more of an ambitious cultural thought that they're putting forward. That now everyone is looking, okay, well, how do I become more efficient? Like now, with a little bit of scrutiny, I think that is the long-term effect that DOGE is going to have on the government. That's, I think, going to be the most important positive and lasting effect of it. Specific to the Infrastructure and Jobs Act.
Well, I just want to read one stat here. I just read this thing on Construction Dive. According to the Brookings Institute, we're 3 years into the $1.2 trillion funding, and there's still about $294 billion to award. And so do you see some of that just kind of going through as is? Do you see shifting of priorities? What are you seeing there?
The money is about 70% committed and spent. So you have a 30% left out there. Different pots of money within that have more or less, but it's about an average of 70%. I think the remaining 30% will get spent, and will almost all get spent where it was intended. By the first thing. Where you're going to see some issues, and I see things being held up, is a lot of the clean energy set-asides, a lot of those more ambitious, aspirational targets.
What would that look like?
Charging stations, subsidies for like large electric vehicles.
So that's more along in the infrastructure. the Inflation Reduction Act.
A lot of that's in the Inflation Reduction Act. But there's all of these bills were stuffed full of green energy. To include the defense bill, the bill that I work on, there's little pieces of that everywhere. Those are the ones that I think are going to get held up, and with limited reprogramming authority that the executive branch has, because Congress has the power of the purse. Once they specify that this is what you're spending money on, they've given up very little reprogramming authority to the executive branch. But where they can, I see the new administration really challenging all those green energy. But the bulk of that 30%, especially the 30% that is already committed to infrastructure, or earmarked is not a term we use, but earmarked for infrastructure, that is going to get spent. So for AEC firms, I think it's
Status
good.
quo.
Yeah, it's good fertile fields for the next 2 years as they spend out that money.
Great. No, that's good to hear. You had talked a little bit in the beginning there about the executive orders. One that I can think of is the PLAs.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of the PLAs were integrated as part of the spend. Do you see any changes there with the new administration?
Yeah, project labor agreements are literally the $35 million question out there right now. So for your listeners that may not be as familiar, what this does is force collective bargaining pre-construction between union labor and the general contractor firm. In the history of this, there's an Obama executive order that put forward that it encouraged, and then Trump did not weigh in on that, did nothing to repeal the existing Obama executive order, and then Biden came in and put a shall, which for those that are lawyers out there or rely on their lawyers, they know that that's a hard language right there.
Right out of college, shall is a very important word.
Exactly. Yeah. When you see shall in your contract or in a law, and what I do, that's binding. That's now we have to do this. So federal projects, $35 million and up, are required now to use project labor agreements on the front side, and so there's been an implementation period for a lot of this. The construction agents like Army Corp of Engineers and their contracting authorities, have figured out how they're going to handle this because they were familiar with it before, but not having to do it every single time. And so the big question is Trump going to rescind this? With Lori Chavez coming in, there's a lot of unknowns. So she was put forward by the Teamsters, right? So we saw an interesting thing happen this past summer at the conventions. We saw, the Teamster president speak at the Republican National Convention, was not invited because of that to the Democratic Convention. And so you kind of had a split between organized labor. And organized labor is going through its own, kind of identity crisis moment right now. Traditionally, the Democrats owned all unions. And so now you kind of have what is the future of union labor? You have, kind of in D.C. and other major, cities, some push towards organized labor for baristas, for restaurant workers. But how much does, the bricklayers, pipe fitters, the tradespeople align and have to do social issues, economic issues that align with baristas, with these restaurant workers. So union is trying to figure it out. But there's a moment where the Republican Party may look at, hey, we can start peeling back more of the unions, and where they're going to want to do that is Teamsters and the tradespeople. What AEC firms both relying on for all kinds of labor. So the final answer is, no one really knows what Trump is going to do. And Lori Chavez, she's even more of a mystery. She's a one-term congressman from Oregon who was previously a mayor. So she doesn't have a huge track record on all of these issues. So now we get into the politics and policy and the strategy of what are the Republicans going to do to continue to court labor. So PLAs are at the crossroads of that.
So PLA may not follow the precedence of each of the administration, depending on which party, will, rescind an executive order that mandates it or pulls it out. And so
a lazy view would be like, oh, Republicans, not normally associated with labor, they're going to rescind it. Well, they didn't rescind the Obama-era executive order, so I would not just assume that. American general contractors, there's some groups that are on the Hill and have done pretty good, PR out there to try to influence this. It also comes down to a question of time and resources, right? There's a lot of work the administration wants to get done in the first 100 days. There's a lot of executive orders. I think, we've traditionally seen just a flood of executive orders come out, and it's more and more each time. I think this will break all previous records for executive orders that come out, in the first 100 days. Will this make the cut? I don't know. That's what we got to see. I don't see the amount of people pushing for it that would make it go above some of these other stuff. The campaign promises that you've seen them talk about, for better or worse, there's not a single rally where anybody talks about PLAs. It's more of a wonkish issue that we care about.
Is it accurate to say that if it doesn't get addressed in the first 100 days, the likelihood of it being changed becomes even slimmer?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to get after that. One, are we going to rescind the executive order? I don't think that's going to happen in the first 100 days. If there's enough groundswell, and that's where guys like me come in to make this an issue, to bring this up an issue. Nancy Mace, she brought it up in an oversight hearing this summer, right? So there's people that are getting to Congress that are making this an issue. That's what's going to happen is someone has to continue to beat the drum that this is costing fair competition, but also it's going to be increasing costs when we're still dealing with post-COVID inflation.
Let's pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of set-asides, programs. I know that the 8A is kind of making its way through the Supreme Court ruling, but small businesses in general, there's concerns out there. Will the administration tighten up or loosen up, whichever way you look at it, that will impede small business opportunities, take away, or are they going to double down? What is your general sense?
Yeah, I mean, so kind of two different issues. You have the normal small business set-asides, which both parties are usually very pro small business, and kind of enabling the Small Business Administration to help out those companies. Now there is, especially in the AEC world, kind of a groundswell from the big primes who probably rightfully so ask the question of like, well, isn't small business supposed to be a pathway to like becoming a large business? And some of these small businesses just continue to hold up that small business threshold and survive off those set-asides. And I see that continuing. I don't think anything's going to change. SBA kind of rules and kind of thoughts on that. Now the 8A being challenged constitutionally. The first kind of shoe to drop in this was the affirmative action ruling, for universities, right? And so we saw that be struck down, and which kind of that opens the door in my mind to the 8A, and there are current court challenges to the constitutionality of economically disadvantaged set-asides. I think that'll be handled in court, and I think it's like too late to pull it back and stop it right now. It's kind of become a separate political issue that's been wrapped in a lot of the DEI stuff, and any of these hearings will have a lot of that rhetoric that has followed from the campaign. I think 8A is probably kind of on the fence, and unless there's a very interesting interpretation of the constitutionality along the same lines, but.
What about the statuses? There's women-owned, there is HUBZone, there's service disabled.
I think HUBZone will increase, if anything. Service disabled is very much kind of a sacred cow for both parties. It's nothing is more politically unpalatable than going after America's veterans. Although we've seen some of those assumptions being challenged, and so I think that'll be scrutinized. With a lot of these things, there's two components, right? There's always executive regulation and Congress, actual legislation. And it takes a lot to tear down all of those, right? The set-aside goals are set by Congress. And so even though that there regulations on the executive that they could, internally take away, there's going to be, going back and forth. And so there's this idea that the executive has all of this power, and they've really usurped a lot of power from the legislative branch over the years, but they still can't do it alone, and they still can't go around the law that Congress sets. So I think they're going to continue to protect all of these set-asides into the future, unless the third rail of that judiciary, cuts them down.
So can we go back to the original point that you were making, that there's a certain sentiment that you're seeing from a lot of the AEC companies, large businesses, where they're questioning, isn't the small business supposed to graduate into a successful, large, unrestricted sort of business? Something that I know personally, because that's what we're trying to do as an organization. We're sizing out of our status. We're trying to grow. We don't want to be in the same status. I think you had said that your sense is that they're really not going to try to tackle that issue, or what are you seeing with the Small Business Administration there?
So there's a big issue that the small businesses face when they try to go and compete large, not just competing with the other primes, on price and scale, but they're protected in a lot of different ways, regulations, tax-wise, while they're small, right? And then so making that jump, right, that middle ground, almost akin to it in the defense side, what I do is we call the valley of death.
The valley of
death.
Death.
Between, you get a SIVER, you get some of this non-dilutive capital funding to actually becoming a program of record and then being able to compete for congressional appropriations. Same, or at least analogous, I guess, for these small businesses that are trying to make that jump. Because, as you know, the Department of Labor has different, regulations once you get over a certain number of employees, right. Everything that falls along with that, insurance. It's just as you scale, it gets progressively hard, and then it's a big cliff, right? You were competing against small businesses, and now all of a sudden you're competing with the same companies that are,
There's so much consolidation going on at the M&A level right now that there aren't that many mid-level companies, and we're seeing that right now.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that the Small Business Administration will start tackling some solutions to address this valley of death that you're seeing out there?
How quickly that happens, I don't know, but I will tell you there are discussions of, for lack of a better term, middle business administration, right? Kind of how do we shepherd these companies in the middle, because we saw big defense.
It's like a new agency they're going to form.
Which is don't tell it to Doge though.
Middle business.
They don't want any
administration.
new agencies, but there almost needs to be something for kind of bridging the gap, because you want these businesses to compete. You want business to be able to grow, and not just through acquisition. And that's how it is now. Is you see the easiest way
to grow
is just increase your sales by buying a bunch of small businesses, put them together, and then really hope that you have collected goodwill and cost efficiencies that'll carry over to being competitive. But that's not always a winning formula either, and it doesn't necessarily always make for a competitive environment.
Sticking to the subject of businesses, what is your sense with this administration, the activity of private-public partnership, the PPPs?
Yeah.
Where do you see the direction? Do you think you'll see more of that over the next 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think, anytime you get a Republican administration come in, they're going to be focused on the private sector and kind of market-driven solutions to a lot of these problems, but that doesn't rule out the need for public and private partnerships. I think that's really a strength and the best lever that the administration can have to get after a lot of their priorities, be it energy, be it infrastructure, be it defense. I think it's still fertile ground for public-private partnerships.
Now, what about, Trump and the administration ran on this America First policies, and one of the things that I've heard and throughout a lot of the discussions is this Buy America Act and the impact that it may even have on supply chain, on schedule, on federal construction programs. Do you have any sense and understanding of how it may impact the construction industry with some of the policies that I think that you're hearing a little bit out there?
Yeah, I mean, a couple different issues are coming together at once here. One, COVID, right?
Right.
The big takeaway from COVID was our supply chain, was completely at the whim of a lot of foreign nations that we didn't necessarily, have the most friendly relationships. Mainly everything in the Far East. And what we learned is, all of our stuff is made overseas.
Yes.
And that created a huge vulnerability as shipping basically ground to a halt there for a short time. And then, you had cost overruns and CHIPS Act. The only thing that really got this going was this stupid virus, right? Because before that, nobody really cared that all of our chips were overseas and in this vulnerable supply chain. Now, the execution of the CHIPS Act, like a lot of legislation, it's the law of unintended consequences. When you talk to legislators, committee staff, they'll say that you think you have problems, wait till you see our solutions, right? They're hatchet men, not scalpels. So they create these broad legislative solutions that are then interpreted in a bunch of different ways.
Now, the CHIPS Act was enacted under the Biden administration. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So the CHIPS Act was recognizing that we had this huge vulnerability. I don't know if any of you bought a car during that time, but this 6,000 gross vehicle weight vehicle was
being delayed by
this
tiny
silicon chip, just because there were so few of them, and it heightened both an economic risk and a national security risk, because everything we do is either has a chip in it now or is going to. And so there's a huge interested national security and economic security play to bring those on board. So then out of that came $50 billion CHIPS Act, and one of the big things for chip production that they learned the hard way is you need water. So no matter how much
energy,
lobbying efforts, just some places are you're going to be better places, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing for America, because we don't want to import water to Kansas to make chips. We want to do it where it makes sense, but we also want to do it within our borders. I think a lot of the same stuff applies, to the construction industry. We're in the era of smart buildings and smart construction. And so, whether those be, different like mass timber solutions that the government's been kind of pushing hard, low carbon concrete, different things that I worked with at the Army Corp of Engineers, is implementing these kind of new guidance that came down, where they were trying to make the government, a leader versus, letting the market forces, kind of figure that out. We'll see more of that, especially as we try to get, as many materials from the United States as possible.
Now, do you think this is going to stir up? And I already see it with the industrial boom that is happening. Do you see with the new administration that just continues to double down on some of that industrial boom that's happening? Data centers. You talked about chip manufacturing. There's batteries. There's all kinds of stuff that I think we're hearing.
Yeah, I mean, out of the Infrastructure and Job Acts, I said earlier about 70%. One of the few buckets of money that's up over 95% is batteries. Right? They've spent all the battery money because that they were able to do right away, and it's a huge investment they're making because we're going to need more energy. Whatever form that comes in, and I think it's going to take all kinds of forms for a while. We'll be in fossil fuel a lot longer than a lot of people think. But that's all got to come from somewhere. We're using so much energy as we, digest these podcasts and everything else that our modern life takes. We're not going back. All of that takes energy. Data centers, so much data, terabytes and terabytes of information. All of that, still goes back to infrastructure, right? We got to build those plants. So much failing infrastructure that we have, whether it's the bridge that we saw in Baltimore, or we just in Korea, you just had a aircraft crash on the runway. There's lots of stuff that's aging that is going to have to be replaced.
Right, water treatment facilities.
Yeah,
all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Seawalls.
Resiliency. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I know that the Biden administration, one of their center party lines was climate change, resiliency, and all of that. What do you think the new administration's perspective on building resiliency for the military and the climate change issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these trends are going to continue, maybe under different names. I don't think this Department of Defense will have a climate strategy. I think they'll tear that down and the rhetoric associated. But resiliency is still important, right? Look at what's happening in California right now with these wildfires. At some point, we're going to hit a tipping point where the insurers are going to have to get involved. Florida, it's very hard to get insurance now because of a lot of these natural disasters. Whether that pace is quickening or the frequency is increased, you'd have to like zoom out and kind of make a unbiased calculation. But what's not up for debate is the fact that the natural disasters, these events are occurring. Mm-hmm. There's construction costs to rebuild in that. There's long-term costs.
An impact to our economy.
Oh yeah, these are not stimulative, events when you have huge loss of property, huge associated loss of life.
Impacts the supply chain of material still and everything above.
Yep. And as we saw from in what I did before of managing the legislative direction for Army Corp of Engineers, there's only so many cranes in the country, and when you do a big Infrastructure and Jobs Act at the same time as you do a big plus up for military construction. Right.
They're competing with the same resources.
Competing for the same pool of resources, right. And these are long lead times to do new procurements. So I think that dilemma is going to be around for a while. What I say about America is we always do the right thing after exhausting all other options, and I mean that's kind of what we do. There are people who are saying for years, hey, these bridges are in need of repair. These buildings. We had the Surfside incident down in Miami Fort Lauderdale area, and now that's forced relooking at all of those giant condo buildings, and
Right.
Once the bad things start happening, then we become acutely aware. Then Congress gets motivated. They produce the funds. That's just kind of the flow of things. I think we're in the still beginning of a 10-year cycle of major infrastructure attention.
That's great. I mean, not for the tragedy, but I think it's much needed. I'm 100% strong proponent of rebuilding sort of the failing infrastructure that we currently have, or the infrastructure that is just old in general. That needs upgrades.
It's very much a bipartisan effort. I mean, President Trump was talking about infrastructure. They were not able to put a bill together, during his presidency, but they were talking about a lot of the same issues, which is why when it was able to come through in the Biden administration, it was a bipartisan infrastructure act that the committee staffs had already been working on for a while. I think that will continue. Will we see another big bill like that? I don't think so, just because it's not in the priorities. But we'll see a lot of omnibus or other bills that some of this infrastructure stuff will be attached to keep the ball rolling on that.
What about the Great American Outdoors Act? I know that, speaking of fires, I understand that the fires have also impacted some of the national parks out in California. That was a major accomplishment under the Biden administration. What do you think is the sense with the new administration coming in, their take on the Great American Act?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to do anything to take away, but it's also just not going to be a priority with a lot of the campaign rhetoric that's already out there. There's just so much time on the congressional calendar, and so few bills pass anyway that I think they're going to tackle the border. They're going to tackle taxes. Those are going to be the first big lifts in the first year for the Trump administration. And then there's all kinds of things that are going to come up that are unforeseeable, right?
If you had the crystal ball, what do you think in the first 100 days that's going to be directly related to what we do? And the border is one, obviously, and that has a lot of construction money. I'm sure that's going to be allocated to it. But any other that you're sensing?
Yeah. I mean, and the border is going to get addressed. I think I saw, just rumor at this point, because we haven't seen official budget numbers, but like $84 billion for DHS. And that's not all just going to be, border wall, right? That's what everybody thinks. Oh, it was just border wall. I think we're going to see a new effort along the border of, surveillance, reconnaissance.
What about border stations?
I think there's going to be some of that. There's going to be, a lot of our critical infrastructure, national security. And so there's going to be a response to that. There's always, construction that falls in the wake of a lot of these things. That's all going to be congressional appropriations. VA clinics, there's still a backlog of VA clinics that need built. And then just the normal kind of civilian stuff that follows off of that, both state and local governments as well.
What about immigration? Strictly speaking of the H1B visa program, there were some Twitters that were going back and forth, and that seems to be one that the Republican Party is trying to find its identity. I wonder if you could just speak to that, because I know many of the engineering companies in our industry depend on these programs because, as you know, we have a labor shortage and we have a shortage of talent, and any help we can get to help deliver quality services to our customers is in line with our objectives.
Yeah. I mean, and this is where you kind of see competing, rhetoric and the dog chasing its tail of like, what is the stance on this? In the press, you see a lot of, supposed dogfighting between members of the administration and kind of the broader base and support over H-1B visas. But, both Vivek and Elon came out, we need all of these H-1B visas. And president sided with them. A lot of the Trump properties have, visa holders that is how they solve the labor shortage as well. So I think that's going to continue to get support from the executive. I think it has bipartisan support in the legislature. So I don't see that changing. But at the same time, it highlights a need for more STEM graduates, right? So a lot of the work that I know a lot of SAME and other organizations are doing to help and encourage, people, young people that want to get into either the trades or into engineering to make sure we have the right people to do that. So I think we'll continue to depend a lot of foreign workers to come over.
I mean, the stats is startling. Like, I think more than 50% of the graduates end up taking their talent to other countries out of the university system. I think I'm going to have to double check the stats, but it's pretty high. And so I think I actually do, well, I don't want to have too much opinion on this topic, but I think it's one that I'd like to know what the direction of that is.
Yeah, and it's something that, isn't necessarily a hot button topic until it is. And then, we saw a very...
Well, everything seems to be, nothing is hot topic until it is. Something happens, right?
Yep. And it's it was kind of dormant and out there. But also a lot of these things are just about challenging assumptions, right? It may sound good to a certain constituency group or a political talking point to be like, all right, we're going to get rid of this. And then they realize like, oh, this is how many industries rely on this. This is, how we stay competitive, whether it's construction, whether it's software engineering, we rely on a lot of this foreign talent.
What about, we live in this town, Washington, D.C. What is your sense with the return to work and all the different initiatives that people are talking about? Do you see D.C. people going back to the office, the pre-pandemic levels, or what is your crystal ball saying?
I mean, I see a big return to work. I mean, I think President Trump had a statement that he made back in December of 5 days in the workplace. So I think that's coming. I think they're going to do agency by agency. I don't think they'll do a blanket statement. And there's a lot of workers that have become very, I guess you could say, comfortable with telework, but it's been a huge sea change, from where I was at in DoD. Like there was no telework policy prior to, because it wasn't. You were in the office every day. You were in the Pentagon every day, and then everyone kind of had to look at this and challenge a lot of assumptions of can we do this? And they figured out they could. But then now it comes back to what's the right mix, what's the right efficiency? Because of Beltway traffic, like there's a lot of good reasons to allow workers to telework every now and then. I think the administration has a big opportunity to show that you're kind of along this doge of efficiency, and I think they're going to do max.
It's going to create congestion again.
Yeah, it's going to create major congestion. But with 5-day work weeks, there's going to be a lot of government workers, especially ones that are kind of at the end of their time. They're going to look at like, hey, I used to go in 2 pay periods a month at some of these agencies. Maybe it's time for me to retire the first time they get on, 495 and have to deal with that traffic. And that kind of feeds into just the reduction of force that DOGE is looking to get anyway, without making hard cuts. It kind of self-selector.
Do you see any trends over the next 2 to 4 years happening that is directly related to what we do?
The biggest thing that I think the industry, and it kind of ties a few of these topics we've talked about, labor, technology, resources, is the introduction of AI.
Wow.
Right? So everyone is talking about AI and everything. Both robotics and AI is going to change everything, construction industry included, right? And so now you have, where you used to have specific tradespeople that did very specific things. If I can bring in, either AI or a robotic solution for that, how do labor unions react to, a very specific, bricklayer, for instance, right? If I can have a robotic solution come in to do that, do I now need a union person doing that robotic solution? You're right. So that's gonna change the scope and the scale of a lot of these things. That's kind of, I think, going to be the next 5 years of a lot of industries, AEC included.
Do you see the administration having policies to spark that type of innovation?
Yeah.
And if so, what do you think?
Yeah, like everything, there's wide opportunity for both stifling and promoting, right? And so from a congressional perspective, on the Hill, there's two sides to almost every issue, right? There is a lot of bipartisan compromise where it comes obvious. But the example I like to use is, 49% of the legislature was against the Louisiana Purchase, They debated this. They came out and said, we're getting ripped off. Why would we want all of this land? And it's like, obviously, thank God, for pennies on the dollar, we were able to buy that from France and Napoleon at a weak time. And there's always someone who benefits in some way from something, and they'll fight against innovation and then it kind of goes back to the Henry Ford thing. If I gave them what they wanted, they would have just said faster horses, right? And you got to have some people that see kind of the forest of the trees, but it's going to be wildly disruption. You saw Andrew Yang run a whole campaign on automatic incomes, right? Because he sees kind of the future of what this could be, where we make either AI or roboticize every aspect of our lives. What does that mean for labor? What does that mean for the general population? Those are the issues I think that the kind of visionary people are thinking of, both in general and within the AEC community.
Now, we're almost coming to an end in our conversation. I really appreciate you taking on all my rapid fire questions, and we covered, I feel like, a lot. But the one thing that I thought that maybe from your perspective that would be important for our audiences to hear is, what is your advice to business owners, professionals that are out there? They may be concerned, optimistic, anxious with the new administration. What is your word of advice that you can share based upon what you see walking, again, the halls of Congress and talking with a lot of companies out there?
I would say a lot of these processes are opaque by design. They're meant to be, backroom deals where it's a lot of theater, and a lot of people I talk to in all walks of life. How do you do it? How do you put up with this? And I was like, well, most of the members I get along with, because who you see on TV is not who they are all of the time, and most of them have the best interest of America in mind. They just have two different visions of what that is. So what I would tell people is, get involved. Congress works for you. Whether you're a business owner and you're trying to figure out how do I get into federal government? How do I sell to federal government? Your congressman works for you, right? Have a meeting, especially, it's easy where we're at in this part of the country to just go to the Hill and meet with your member and their staff. But their staff, that's their job, is to meet with you, hear your concerns. They're not always going to do what you say. That's why, you have lobbyists that bring together groups and you kind of assert pressure. Meet with them. Become engaged, let them know your priorities, weigh in on some of these issues. You'd be surprised at how much a small constituent, voting block, will get a member's attention just because voter turnout is low, and they do not want to be seen as not doing their job and hearing from the people.
So I think we're coming to an end here, but before we sign off, I do want to give you the opportunity to say lasting remarks.
No. So I'm optimistic for really the next 4 years, but also the next 50 years. I think it was Warren Buffett that said never bet against America. I think America is great because we have these dialogues, because we are thinking about these things, because we still value innovation. So I'm very bullish on that.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate you coming on the Build Up, and looking forward to the next 100 days and looking back at some of the conversations we're having and see how much of that will square up. So thank you.
Excellent. No, thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.